So this is Jen Reiher. A nerd since birth, Jen is obsessed with the ways technology can enhance our lives. She is passionate about leveraging digital tools to share information, building community, and finding delicious food. She can often be found where the intersection of at least two of these three things meet. Intersection?
Yeah. You know, like food and technology, or food and community, or community and technology.
Love it.
Yeah.
Jen began her career in nonprofit, but the lure of technology was too strong for her geeky heart. She is currently a front-end UI UX developer at Benevity, where she focuses on their white label strategy. Please welcome Jen for WCAG compliant color themes, lessons from white labeling a software as a service product for Fortune 1000.
Hi everyone, welcome to a beautiful Victoria Day here in Victoria on the traditional territory of the Wasanic, Songhees, and Esquimalt nations. Super excited to be here today to share with you all my journey over the last 2 years working at Benevity. My talk today is going to be a lot about systemic change. It's going to be a lot about an emerging design system that we're working on. But it's also going to be this magical thing that happens when designers and developers work together. So I'm really lucky at Benevity. I work with an amazing team of people on this project over the last 2 years. These are just some of the faces that I'm privileged enough to get to interact with every day. And all of these people have given me so much inspiration and insight and helped move this forward. And we couldn't have done this without them. So thank you to these folks for helping make what you're gonna see over the next 45 minutes happen. So what is Benevity? Our global moonshot is around global goodness. So we really want to change the world and make it a better place. And that sounds cheesy, but it's actually really magical how that comes together every day. We just had our 10th anniversary as a company. We're almost 500 people now. Our head office is in Calgary, but we also have satellite offices here in Victoria, in Toronto, San Mateo, as well as recently in the UK. So what do we make? We make a suite of user engagement software. So the main product that I work on is around giving and volunteering. So for example, as an employee, if there's a hurricane relief campaign, I can go in and make a donation, and my employer will match that so that more money goes to charity at the end of the day. We also can do volunteering. So I can volunteer for a cause that I'm passionate about, go in and log my hours, and then my company will give me money to donate to either that charity or another charity. So I can double my impact, which is really amazing. We recently launched some software around social behavior change. So for example, as in the fall, as a company, we all worked on this sustainability initiative through our product. We logged the tasks that we did to make things like better changes, so like turning the light off when we leave a room, or adjusting our thermostats to be more automated. And at the end, we could look back and say, as a company, because of the result of all those changes, we made an impact on our footprint on the environment, which is pretty incredible. We also have an awesome set of products around granting so that our administrators of the funds can go in and make the best decision about who should have their money and where that money should go at the end of the day. And of course, none of this would mean anything if we didn't have an amazing database of charities that we can get that money to really efficiently at the end of the day. And we've grown a lot over the last years, like a lot. How much, you ask? It's been pretty crazy. So I joined in 2016, November, so just about 2 years now. And this was, if I roughly reverse engineer it, probably what our big slide looked like at the time. So yeah, you can see there's a lot of big companies up there, household names, you probably recognize the vast majority of those. So it was pretty crazy cool to feel like a part of that. And this is what it looks like now. And so you can see we've grown like incredibly. We've brought on Twitter recently. We've got Macy's now. I'm trying to think who else we've been really excited about the last few years. PayPal. It's been absolutely incredible. And I was crunching the numbers, and I think it's been like a double the number of users that I work on just in the last 2 years. So what does that actually mean? What do I do? we're going to hear today to talk about the white label piece of our strategy. If you're a designer in the room, this is probably going to make you wish that you'd maybe paid attention in math class a little bit more. We're going to get a little bit nerdy. And if you're a developer in the room, you're probably also going to wish that you'd taken that design elective, because we're going to get really nerdy about color, and it's going to be awesome. I'm super excited to show you some of the really innovative things that we're doing, and how we've learned some hard lessons and pivoted away from as our growth has happened, and so that we can actually meet that scale that we're experiencing. So what does white label mean at Benevity? It allows us to connect the client and their beautiful brands to the product. So putting in things like their colors, their logo, other imagery, we're able to bring all those things together and help it really feel like it belongs to them. And that's super important, because those are some pretty big brands, and branding is incredibly important to them. This is what makes it meaningful to them, to be able to put their stamp on that and say, we're doing good as a company in the world, and we want our employees to know that. It's also a lot about user trust. So we don't really think about this on the day-to-day as a company. It's not like we sit around being like, oh yeah, we're building a micro donation platform. Yay, we're an e-commerce company. That's not at all the vibe in our office. But that's kind of what we're doing. When people come on and donate, they're making a financial transaction. They're trusting us that when they make that donation, that money is going to go where they expect it to. It's not going to end up 75% of it going to the company and 25% making to the charity, which I think is that fear that people have. So by having their company's logo up in that top left-hand corner and having that feeling that it belongs to their company, they have that trust to put their money in and make that donation and make sure that it gets there. And I think one of the things I never would have thought of before I saw how it was actually working is the way that companies are using imagery to help build that connection across the world. So if I'm, as I am, in a remote office, but I go on and I log in and I see a photo of our CEO or my director making that volunteering effort in the world, and I can see that, I feel like part of something bigger, and that's inspiring, and I feel connected to that head office. And that is really exciting to see how people are leveraging our product to make that community building happen. But before we get into it, I have to get a little philosophical about color, because white labeling kind of disrupts this idea that we have as looking at our product of what that means, and have a little bit of an existential crisis about this sometimes, about what is color anyway? Because when we're talking about white labeling, it's not like you can say that thing is blue. That is blue and orange, but when we're talking about maybe John Deere, it could be green and yellow. Or orange and purple. It's not necessarily the way, you can't count on it to be one way all the time. And that's been very mind-bending. So I want to take you through a little bit of what this feels like on the day-to-day. So what color is this? We could talk about it in RGB, so look at the red and the green and the blue value in here and inspect that and look at it from that perspective. Yeah, for sure, that would work. We could talk about it as a hex value, which in the web as a front-end developer, I often do. That's the layer that I live in. Sometimes I need to think about this in terms of hue, saturation, and lightness, and I'm going to talk more about the power of that later. At the end of the day, this is how the computer sees it. It's just a binary representation of a thing that we see with our eyeballs. How crazy is that? Some of you might have thought this is red. Some of you might have said it's orange. Some of you might call it reddish orange. And I put it through a color naming tool on the web. It came back as grenadier, which I don't know that I agree with that, but okay. But for us, this is Microsoft's orange. So Microsoft puts this on their product to say that this is part of their brand. So we really have to stop thinking about what color is this when we talk about it as Benevity, and what we've really started to think about is instead, how will this be used? how is this user going to feel about this color? Is it consistently being applied in the way that they expect throughout our product? And that's the real shift for me as a developer and how I think this. And we've really had to retrain our team as developers to think about that in that way. So there's 4 big things I'm going to speak to you about today that we've really learned, and I'm super excited so that if you ever are in the same position, you can skip over all these painful parts. The first thing is going to be around consistency. So how do we make sure that this is the exact same experience for every user of our site all the time? I'm going to talk a lot about accessibility today, as called out in the title of the product, and speak around WCAG compliance. Also share some really exciting ways that we've come to more simplicity and why that's incredibly important. And then I want to end with some really cool sophistication that we've been able to bring, and really cutting edge stuff that I'm super excited to talk about. But let's start with the hard place. So when I came on 2 years ago, we really didn't have any consistency at all. As you saw, I came on, we had a lot of clients already. We had grown incredibly fast up until that point. And as with most early stage startups, the solution is to throw people at problems. So if you can imagine hundreds of individually coded CSS files for every single individual client. If you've ever written a line of code, that's probably making you slightly queasy, and it should, because that is terrifying, especially when someone comes to you and says, hey, so we're thinking of doing a redesign. What would that look like from the client perspective? Like, how's that gonna go? You're like, okay, I see, okay, yeah, let me think about this. Because there were some problems with how it currently was. Because it wasn't scalable at all, obviously. It's to manually go in and update every single one of those files and have the expectation that you aren't going to make any mistakes is pretty difficult. I mean, they've done it so far, but to get any further, that was just not able to continue. Because there was no consistency. And consistency requires code consistency if you're going to get the end result that you expect. And I actually was really struggling. I mean, obviously we had our official list of what was possible, but when I started to dig into it, I realized that there was no way for me to quantify how many people had which configuration. I couldn't say, okay, great, all these people have it this way, and these people have it this way, and we can count that, and we can know how to shift that. There was just no possibility of that because there was no way to actually measure anything. And because everything was being built as a one-off, there was absolutely no guarantee that a really big client wasn't like, oh, would it be possible if we just did this little thing? And of course, we love our clients and we want to please them whenever possible. So every once in a while, that might have snuck in. But that was completely invisible. You couldn't just say, oh, great, okay, yeah, XYZ client has this, and we need to make sure to protect that, without actually learning, which I kind of eventually did. I could just look at the code and know whether or not that was an option. But that was just ridiculous. That is not the way forward. So we were saved by SaaS. And SaaS is a piece of tooling for the front end. It's for CSS. So it gives CSS superpowers. It allows us to do all the things that we can do with other programming languages, like have variables, write loops, have functions, and basically reuse code, which as a developer, that is what we're trained to do. We don't want to have any repetition where we don't want there to be repetition. So we made use of these heavily. And we no longer needed to copy and paste that code every time that we needed to make a new white label file for our client. And we were actually able to have it be produced by the technology. So this is what this looks like. So we have a variable, and that lives in the client site. And we can define it at whatever we want. And it uses this mixin, which is essentially a function. And so it receives the color and it connects it into the CSS. So we're able to include that wherever we need to in our product so that we can actually apply that same link color however it needs to be. And at the end, it outputs consistent CSS. So if we change that link value for a different client, it would just produce the same thing, but with that other color. And that's huge for us. That was a huge shift to be able to do this. And now that we're there, and now that we have that consistency, we're moving towards our next big project, which is to allow the administrators, either on the client side or on our side, to be able to change those colors themselves, which we couldn't do before because there was no guarantee of how that would work. And that's our next goal, and I'm super excited to get there because it's going to allow us to have that scale. The other piece of magic that we use are what's called utility classes in CSS. So this is what that looks like. So we would define with CSS, after the SaaS mixin is all done, what client color button looks like. And we can give it a background color, and we can give it a border, and all those things that we need. And then we give it this important tag so that it overrides everything else. So when it's applied in the HTML, it adds that color in. And so because every client loads their own color set, it overrides whatever is on the default for that button and gives it that client's color. So we use this a lot, pretty much everywhere. Things like hover colors as well, we can use SaaS to define those. And then when they hover over it, it applies that background hover color. The next big challenge that was happening when I joined Benevity was that we were making a commitment as a company to be a fully accessible product, which I came from an accessibility nonprofit, so to me that was super exciting. I was really excited to be on board with this. I had no idea what was in store for me in terms of how to actually get this to happen. And what that terminology is in the web is called WCAG compliance. So color is only a part of that, but it is the part that is related to white label, and we're going to talk about today. But first, let's talk about what WCAG means. So it's the web content accessibility guidelines, and it's basically the agreed upon set of rules which the community has decided we're going to say, okay, yes, that website is accessible, that website is not accessible. They're created by, if you're curious, by this World Wide Web Consortium, which is often shortened to W3C. So this is like an independent governing body of the web is kind of how I think about them. So they've come together and they've created this set of rules, and this set of rules is how we measure accessibility. At Benevity, I think we really embrace this, especially on the design side, as part of a feeling of universal design. So we're going to make this product better for a subset of users. And when we're talking about color, that's not necessarily for people who are visually impaired and need like a screen reader to access their computer. This is often for people whose eyesight is starting to go as they age, especially older men. This is apparently demographically more common. So that means that they have trouble seeing when the contrast between two colors, like the background and the text color, is too faint. And what we joke about with our clients sometimes is like, this is actually pretty important because the person that we're probably talking about here could be that guy in your C-suite that just got glasses. He might be the one that's impacted by this. This isn't simply that stereotypical visually impaired person you have in your head. But where universal design comes in is like, if I made the background of this slide a super light blue, you might have trouble reading it from the back of this room. So it not only impacts that small portion of the demographic, but it can have wider reaching design implications for just general improvements overall. So how do we get to this number? This is where it gets a little mathy. Stick with me if that's not your thing. It's basically a ratio, and how we get to it, I'm going to gloss over a lot here, but just from a super high level. You take the background color, so on this slide it's blue. You take the text color, it's white. You take into account the font size and the weight of the font, because if it's something smaller, it's hard to read. And the ratio of all of these things produces either a passing grade or a failing grade between the two colors. So that, for this dark blue here, on the left-hand side, 0066FF, it is 4.83 to 1 ratio on white. And in WCAG, we have 3 things that we test against. But for our product, we need 4.5 to 1 because we started building this way before this was a thing. And so some of our font sizes are really small, and to guarantee it's fully accessible, we have to meet that 4.51 or it won't work in some locations. So this color blue would be beautiful to use in your white label. It would work perfectly anywhere that you wanted to use it with white text or a white background. Some clients might have a hot pink theme. Lyft is one of our clients, for example. Hot pink is their brand color. This is the discussion we had with them. So this pink, 3.14 to 1, it is a good number if your font size is larger. And this is where the conversations at the client level can get interesting, because sometimes as a company, they've thought about this. And they've been like, yes, I would love to have an accessible color scheme. I've put one together. I'm using large fonts because that's better. And we get their guide and we're like, unfortunately, this is not accessible for our product. And we need to think together with them about how to make that work. So it would not work in our product, even though on their website it might be fine. And then lime green, which you'd think isn't a super common color, but you'd be surprised how often I've come across it. It doesn't work at all from an accessibility perspective. It's a nice color, but it's not accessible. So that wouldn't be able to use with a white background. You might be able to use it with black text over that, and that would be a different conversation. So whenever I'm starting to put together a recommendation for a client about how to use their colors in an accessible way in our product, it becomes this little game of will it WCAG? And it's sometimes fun, and I usually try to test myself to see if I can get it right. So you're coming back to this orange, Microsoft's orange. Will it WCAG? And the answer is yes. Yes, it will. And I think this is probably because Microsoft is really aware of this. In fact, they were one of our biggest allies in helping to create a fully accessible product. And they have probably thought really hard about this and making sure that they can have something that works well for everyone. The same is not true when we brought Twitter on recently. And this could be because the rules and the legalities around WCAG don't apply when you're talking about a consumer-facing product. It's really only relevant in some places if you have legal rules in your area that applies to your employees. So you would need to provide something that your employees, regardless of their ability, can use. And for Twitter, that probably doesn't apply. So it may not have been something that they've thought about before. Certainly, they're not going to change that Twitter blue in order to meet that. So no, it didn't pass, and it was an interesting conversation. But over the years, we figured out some ways to deal with this around communication and using technology, and it's been really successful. So what that looks like is now I can test this color, and I can just figure out if it will pass with white or black, and where we could use it. So I put in the blue, and it didn't work on a white background, which is always a bit sad because that makes it a really easy conversation. We could use it as a button with black text, and that's an option that we can provide to the client. But where it started to get really cool over the last little while is we figured out ways to shift these colors, to change them so that they do pass, but they still look like they belong. And they still feel like part of that palette, so when that user logs in, it's part of that. And that's an option that we can offer them. So what that looks like is for the one on the left here at the bottom, we can saturate that color until it gets that 4.5 to 1 number. And then we know that it will pass that accessibility mark. And sometimes, like I've seen a few, it's so close. It's like 4.45 to 1. And when you do this, you can't tell the difference visually looking at it. And a hex code at the end of the day is a general approximation of a brand color. So usually we can offer that up and say, like, this will allow you to meet that compliance and tick that box. Is this an option you would like? And we've had great success with that. Sometimes that color on the left, depending on the shade, can be just a little bit intense. So sometimes we also try it out with this option on the right, which is to saturate it and darken it a little bit until it passes. And that can sometimes just feel a little bit better. So we usually offer them up examples of both to check out. The next piece I want to talk about as being probably the biggest change, but I think probably some of the best change that we've made. And it's really learning that sometimes less is more. So when I came on, there were 6 colors, I think, that we offered as clients, plus all the combining text colors now that we're doing accessibility. So making sure anything like a button or our navigation had the right text color on it to pass the accessibility mark. That was a lot. And sometimes they end up looking a little bit like, as our fearless leader Jim says, a box of crayons. It was not feeling so easy to look great all of the time. And sometimes I felt like I was doing a Sudoku puzzle to just try to get it to work, because I knew I didn't want things that were clickable to be the same color as things that were not clickable. So I would put something in one place and then I knew I couldn't put it in the other. And it made it really complicated, and also meant that there were very few people in the company who could put this together, which is not scalable, and that wasn't working very well. So I'm really thankful that we brought on a new designer named Owen. You saw his slide up there, and he came to us one day and was like, could we just have a conversation about what it would look like if we just had 2 colors? And we use the main color in lots of different places, and then they could, if they wanted to, they don't have to, have a second color that's the button color that just draws attention to things. And we played with it a little bit, and it was feeling pretty good. We were going to test it out, and it worked incredibly well. This is where we got to today. So using just 2 palette, we can pull that blue in lots of different places in lots of different ways. And then we can call attention to things like the search button up here with green. And we tested it out with a few of our bigger brands. So here's what it looks like with our friends at TELUS and our friends at Netflix. And it's working really well, and it feels great. And we've tested it quietly with a few clients, making recommendations in this simpler way, and they're so much happier. There are so many fewer conversations like, you know, that part is feeling a little bit off-brand, which is code for that looks terrible. And they just seem to have, it feels more modern, it feels more intentional, and we were at first a little bit scared about taking things away, but so far it's been a great choice, and I'm really happy to went in this direction. Imagery. Image is being hard. We have a lot of imagery, and when we first started, it was fine because everyone used the defaults, and the defaults have been very carefully chosen, and they were very designed, and they look great, like this superhero boy jumping off to save the world. It's a beautiful image, and it works really well in this location. But the problem is that that's the actual size of this image that we were telling clients that they could use. But to a non-design eye or to the casual observer, that's what they think it is. So when we get the result back from them to start putting in and testing out, this is what it ended up looking like, which is not awesome, doesn't look or feel intentional. And then you have to have this awkward kind of conversation where you have to say, we need to shift your vision for how you wanted it to be to get it to look really great, which is never like a great place to start, just on a compromise. So we've learned a few things. The first and most important, I think, is that if you give someone a size specification, they're going to take up the entire amount of that space if you let them. And that most people are just going to do that, even if you tell them not to, which is where we started first. First, we were like, okay, we just need more communication around this. We're going to make lists, and we're going to have examples, and we're going to just give them this information. But at the end of the day, no one wants to read, I guess, a 30-page manual, if it's really pretty and well-written, to get their product to look the way they want. It's just not really the right direction. The other really surprising thing, and that it is really surprising, is that even those big, huge companies that we work for don't necessarily have the design resources just on hand to throw at bringing people on for a project like this. In fact, sometimes I find the bigger the company, like the more bureaucracy there is and the harder I think it can be to find those resources. So it really needs to be something that's simple enough that pretty much everyone has the option to be able to do it. And so where we got to is something like this. So they could take up that whole space, they can use it with whatever they want, they can put an image in there, they can put a really nicely designed image in there too, and both will work equally well. And we're starting to apply this to shift this for all of our imagery throughout the site. And it's really making that process more streamlined, helping us scale, and helping clients just feel really good when they're putting it together. Yeah, I did that, it looks great. That's a great feeling, and that's the feeling we want them to have. All right, the last section. I'm super stoked about this. Because we simplified, I think, we're starting to be able to do some really sophisticated things with our color. And these are things that when we started looking around, like, we haven't really seen anyone else's doing this, so we feel like we're being really innovative and we're really excited about it. So I'm very excited to talk about it today. The hard part, right, like I talked about, we don't get to pick the color that the client chooses. And you can't just like put something in there that's easy because we're not in control of that, right? So we started talking about button colors and hover states. And it works pretty well for most colors, so you're familiar now with this Microsoft Orange. And when we hovered it with our default settings that we had, it looks good. Like this is using just the SaaS darken function, darkening by like 7% or something like that. We were pretty happy with that. That was great. You know, checked it out. Everybody gave it the thumbs up. That was wonderful. Then we started bringing on some other clients with things like yellow, which is a trickier color. And our designer, John, was looking over my shoulder one day as I hovered over the button of the Suncor theme, and he was like, I don't know, like it's not really looking intentional to me. And he didn't say it like this, but it does not look like the prettiest color. And so he was like, well, could we do something else instead? Which whenever we're doing something different for like one individual client, that's a problem, right? Like this isn't scalable. We're not gonna be able to do that in the long term. So one day he came to our meeting and he was like, okay, stick with me here. I'm noticing something. There's something about our colors that we're having trouble with. They're all in this one area of this diagram. And I'm wondering if there's something we could do about that with code to make that better. And he started talking to us about luminosity and how important that is in measuring in order to be able to know how to shift a color in a way that's intentional and feels right. And so we went away and we made something that would test the color, and if it was in that luminosity range, we could increase the brightness and the saturation and get to a hover state that looks pretty good. That feels like it belongs with that color in that palette. And we were really happy with that. And that was super exciting for us to be able to do. And the part that made me the most excited was when I was sitting with one of our frontline people and I was telling them about giving this presentation, and they were like, oh, that sounds really cool. Like, when is that launching? And I was like, oh, it's been out for a while now. And she couldn't tell. And to me, that said that we had been doing it well. So that was really great. And then we started building this out a bit more, and we brought on our friends at AAA. And I hovered over their button one day and noticed that it didn't really look like it had changed. And we maybe missed part of this. Just darkening it, it wasn't actually different because it was already so dark. So that wasn't going to work. It wasn't a two-size-fits-all solution. So what we came to was increasing the brightness and decreasing the saturation, so shifting in the other direction. And that really, it still feels like it belongs. So what we do now is we test again and say, okay, if this color is super saturated, then we need to do something a little bit different with it. And that is working well. So with those 3 ways of inspecting our colors, just looking at them in that way, we've been able to actually start programmatically shifting our colors in ways that really work well. And this is blowing all of our minds, and we're super excited about it. And so when I said that we had 2 colors, it's not actually true now. So we've been able to bring back some of that complexity, some of that meaningfulness and texture in our designs by using these altered colors as you hover over things. And this is the direction that we're definitely going to be going in for more of our, of bringing back that depth in our design. So it's definitely the future. And I think what's really exciting about this is that we sort of had this concern when we started talking about accessibility that we would need to somehow compromise in order to have a really beautiful looking design. And I think because we're able to have this innovation, we can think about that differently. We can start to say, okay, how do we have something that's beautiful and accessible, and start to make better use of things like testing those colors, shifting the saturation, shifting the hue, but still having it feel on brand. And we know that we're only going to need to do more of this in order to continue to evolve our product. The end. Okay. Thanks so much for listening. If you could take 2 things away from this day, I hope that you take away that accessibility can be beautiful and less can be more.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Cool. You have a good little selection of questions here.
Ooh.
So I'm just going to start at the top. Thank you, everyone, for your really good questions. So first question is, have you seen conflicts with important and custom user style sheets? For example, colorblind users applying their own black and white style sheets.
Ooh, that's a good question. That is not something we've ever actually tested, but we probably should. So guess what I'm doing Monday?
Cool. Colors look different in context according to what's next to them. Do/can you use that?
Interesting. I think our designers think about that a lot. That would be probably a better question for them. I work more on the implementation of their designs, but I know that they put a lot of thought into that kind of thing. So when they're putting together something, they're very much aware of those combinations.
Awesome. Is Benevity held accountable for accessibility in the workplace once you deliver the product to a business?
It's a good question. We're not really sure. I think we come from a place of we want to do the best thing that we can for everyone. So we always have the conversation with clients around accessibility, and we say, you may be responsible for this. We want to let you know about this. Here's what we can recommend. And so far, everyone has been on board for that. That being said, I think around some of the other requirements where it's more built into our code and less something that's sort of in between, it may be a different story.
I would wonder too, if this is in addition to the question, if you have like terms of service that somewhat protect you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, up until now, I've just been I've been sharing the information with clients. They've been really happy to receive it and gone in a direction that is accessible. So to me, that speaks to like that people want this, right? And it hasn't really been something that we've needed to worry about.
Nice. Is the WCAG?
WCAG, that's what we say.
WCAG.
Yeah.
Is the WCAG tool you're demoing in your slides available online, or is it something in-house?
It is something in-house, and I don't think I'm allowed to share it. I'm sorry. But there are very similar things out there. I basically put together the things that I use 3 different tools to do. So I was going through 3 different websites to do it, so I knew it was possible. I'd be happy to talk afterwards about how I did that. It wasn't super hard, but I can't share the code.
Will you be posting your slides?
It sounds like there will be a PDF available.
What are your recommended tools for checking color accessibility?
The Ally website has a really good tool, but if you Google WCAG color contrast, I think it's one of the first ones that comes up, and you can put in your number in there, and it will tell you at which level it passes and fails. The harder part I found, especially coming on and having no context for it, is figuring out like which one you're aiming for in what context. So that's actually probably the harder part than testing the color.
How did you pick the colors for your slides?
That's a good question. So we actually have a version of our slide deck that's a lighter blue, and we realized as the UX team that that wasn't working so well on big things like this. So one of our UX designers created the alternative versions that you see. Yeah. If you're talking about just the random colors on the picture, that was mostly just thinking of ones that had worked well in the past and borrowing from them.
If you only have 2 colors, what do you do for secondary buttons?
So our secondary buttons are all neutral. So there are various shades of gray.
And then the last question I have here is that button hover effect a SaaS mix-in? Can you share it?
Yes, I realized when I was looking at that it was not like quite the clearest code example. I could definitely write out something clearer. But yeah, you can use the mix-ins to still apply the hover state. Yeah, it needed a little tweaking. It was a late edition last night. It was very late.
Awesome. So that's all the questions that we had here. So thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you.
And I have some, let's see.